The Ferrari SF26 has finally arrived. We saw it both live during the shakedown at Fiorano and in the renders. In today's video, we will look at the main technical innovations because there are many, even though this is the initial version of Ferrari for 2026. We will comment on it, examine the benefits and the different structural choices compared to other teams like Mercedes, make some comparisons, and also discuss the words of Hamilton and Leclerc, as well as Frederic Vasseur from Loïc Serra. Let's hear about the internal environment at Ferrari and the goals they want to achieve this season. We will go into all the details, but before we start, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and activate notifications so you don't miss any news related to Formula 1 and Ferrari. I sincerely thank you all for the support you gave me live this morning when we saw the Ferrari for the first time. There were so many of you, so thank you very much, guys. Thank you from the heart. Now let's get started with the video. The single-seater with which Maranello truly enters the new regulatory era of Formula 1 is not a simple evolution. It is not an adjustment of the previous project. It is a clean break with the past. A Ferrari designed to start from scratch to give Leclerc and Hamilton a tool with which to fight at the front again in a completely new technical context. In fact, the SF26 comes from a true blank slate. The car is shorter, narrower, lighter, but above all, it is built around a completely rethought power unit, where for the first time the internal combustion and electric parts have practically equivalent weight. It's a paradigm shift that has forced everyone in the technical department led by OXR to rethink every single detail. And here we arrive at the first look at Ferrari. This Ferrari does not copy anyone, but engages with what others have done. You can see influences from McLaren and some conceptual choices similar to those of Mercedes, but the project remains consistent with its own philosophy. What we see today is not yet the definitive Ferrari for the debut that will arrive in Melbourne, Australia at the first race of the season. It is the foundation, the starting point on which the aerodynamicists will work during the tests in Barcelona and in the early stages of development. But it is a foundation that tells a lot. In fact, we start from the front end. Ferrari returns with the push rod suspension, abandoning the pull rod setup after just one season. A choice that has now become almost mandatory with the end of the ground effect era as we knew it. The upper triangle is very open, while the lower one is extremely compact, and the system shows a complexity greater than what has been seen so far on other cars of 2026. We still have a pronounced anti-dive effect on the front suspension, but the real novelty is the positioning of the steering arm set back behind the lower triangle, a solution that originated from walking and then moved to broccoli, and now finally arrives at Ferrari, which has decided to interpret it in its own way to improve the cleanliness of the flows towards the sides. The nose also changes completely. In fact, it is scooped out underneath with two very prominent pillars that support the front wing and channel the central flow towards the rear. The wing is currently deliberately basic. The main profile is flat, the end plates are simple, and we have a footplate that is not exaggerated. It's a clear choice. First, you work on mechanical balance, then on aerodynamics, which is more aggressive, and subsequently on the details. The wheelbase also tells an interesting story. In fact, Ferrari doesn't seem to have pushed to the maximum limit of the wheelbase. The SF26 is probably a few centimeters shorter, a choice made to save weight and find the best compromise with the new reduced dimensions of the single-seater. In fact, every centimeter counts, especially when the goal is to get close to the minimum weight of 678 kilos. On the weight front, the project has been anything but simple. In fact, in Maranello, they know that the beginning will be complicated. They have a few extra kilos and it's almost inevitable, both due to aerodynamic choices and power unit choices. The plan is clear. It involves an aggressive development plan to quickly reach the regulatory limit while other teams risk starting much further away. Looking at the sides, the new cooling philosophy is immediately noticeable. The air intakes are triangular, very sculpted at the lowest part, obviously referring to the area at the entrance of the radiator mouths, and the undercut remains pronounced but less extreme compared to the SF25. The bodywork tightens strongly towards the rear, following a very clean Coca-Cola shape less extreme than that of Mercedes. This is where the work done by the engine builders comes into play. In fact, the new power unit has been designed to minimize radiating masses. The engine operates at temperatures and pressures never seen before, thanks to a steel cylinder head that allows for reduced cooling requirements, freeing up space, reducing aerodynamic resistance, and offering aerodynamicists greater freedom. The central area is also interesting, with a sideboard composed of 3 staggered elements supported by 2 struts, one clearly aerodynamic and the other structural. It's a refined solution aimed at managing the airflow to the floor very precisely, and it's the first time we see it on the Ferrari. It's not present on any other team. The floor currently shows only 2 diagonal blowouts near the exit, but it's clear that this will be one of the most developed areas throughout the season. We also have a sort of hole next to the diffuser, which is an air extractor that helps channel the flows towards the rear and thus outside the car. This slot is also present on the Mercedes. The aeroscope remains small and triangular, with a very pronounced vertical fin. There is no central radiator seen on other cars, such as on the Mercedes. It's a countercurrent choice that confirms how in Maranello they have followed an independent path, without being too influenced by rivals or even other customer teams. There is also a return to the past behind it. The rear suspension returns to push rod, a choice not seen for over 15 years. And this has forced a complete redesign of the gearbox, moving the linkages upward and freeing up the lower part of the diffuser. It is a significant decision that shows how much Ferrari believes in this very extreme concept. The rear wing, on the other hand, seems much closer to the version we will see in the tests in Barcelona. A slightly trapezoidal profile, spoon-shaped leading edge, and end plates that connect under the deformable structure. In summary, the Ferrari SF26 is not a conservative Ferrari. It is a car that takes risks, experiments, and makes bold decisions. It is not perfect, it is not final, but it is consistent, and that is perhaps the most important signal. Ferrari is not chasing, it is choosing a direction. In this new regulatory era, the most important thing is to take a direction that is unique in order to strive for the best against competitors. Ferrari has chosen many solutions that are very different from other teams, such as the strut present in the area of the bargeboards, which is an innovative solution that we haven't seen on any other car. We have seen the return of the pushrod suspension at the rear, which hasn't really been seen for 15 years. For a very long time, we have also seen pushrod suspension at the front, which, if we want to say, is almost a guilty mission for Ferrari. They made a mistake last year by changing too quickly towards pull rod, which, yes, was a right decision in the ground effect era, but made too late now when McLaren and Red Bull had already mastered that element at its best, while Ferrari faced issues with the drivability of the Ferrari SF25. On the contrary, this year, they immediately decided to return to a simpler system, the pushrod, which allows for better drivability of the single-seater, better absorption of the unevenness of the terrain, and also simplifies the work in modifying the setup. So, a highly approved choice. But we also need to talk about Ferrari's shakedown with Lewis Hamilton this morning, because there was some problem. In fact, Hamilton completed one lap and then stopped immediately. Why? The first to take the Ferrari SF26 on the track was Lewis Hamilton, and we heard a roar from the crowd that accompanied the first few meters. With the track still damp, the Pirelli demo tires required by the regulations, which for this type of shakedown were cold. It wasn't a performance simulation, it wasn't a time attack obviously, it was a check to see that everything on the car was functioning. Hamilton completed one lap, then slowly returned to the pit, and the car was brought back inside. We saw some issues with bringing the car back in, but then we saw the subsequent laps. The 7-time world champion had the opportunity to test key elements of this new Formula 1, such as active aerodynamics, the front and rear wing flaps opening on the straight, exactly as stipulated by Regulation 1.26, and this is not a minor detail, as it is one of the most delicate points of this new generation of single-seaters. The Fiorano circuit is less than 3 kilometers long, and this means one very clear thing, that the program is stripped to the bone. They did a quick shakedown, 5 total laps to be divided between Hamilton and Leclerc, and that's enough to verify that everything is under control before sending the car to Spain, and obviously to the Barcelona test that will take place next week. Before getting into the Ferrari SF26, both drivers hit the track with highway cars. And it's not folklore, it's not marketing, it serves to read the track, understand the level of grip, and get an idea of the real conditions of the asphalt. At Fiorano, every detail matters, even when it seems trivial. The real shakedown, the important one, will arrive in a few days in Barcelona. 3 days of closed-door testing, without an audience, without media noise, where the Ferrari SF26 will really start to tell something more about its character, if it will truly test the reliability of this competent new engine with a steel head, a different solution from many other teams that instead have the classic aluminum head. However, today's is both a symbolic and technical transition. In fact, the Ferrari SF26 is no longer a rendering, it's no longer a static presentation, it's no longer a promise, it's a car that moves, that breathes, that activates complex systems in a real context. So it doesn't matter how fast it went. Count that it went well and that it was done without too many hitches. From Fiorano to Barcelona, the most silent and important part of the work begins now. And it is there that the Ferrari SF26 will stop being just a new Ferrari to start becoming a true single-seater, hopefully in the fight for the championship. And as Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc themselves said during the presentation, what will matter more is how well the driver adapts to the car. Because in such a significant regulatory change with new modes to use in the race, well, the driver who can best adapt to the new rules will also be able to max maximize the single-seater, and that will be a key element. Whoever can make the best use of the hybrid engine, the electric energy, the boost, those will be important parameters, as well as active aerodynamics. In fact, the first thing Leclerc said, which is fundamental this season, is preparation. It took a long time to develop the Ferrari SF26. For many months they have been developing it. It is an extremely important project, and there is a lot of pressure on Frederic Vasseur himself, who is in charge of the entire project, and also on OXR, which is in charge of the technical part instead. But the drivers also have a lot of pressure because they want to be at the front, they want to be competitive again with Ferrari, which for some years now has not been competitive up front, is no longer the reference team, and they want to return to being that team. However, preparation will be crucial, so preparing both from a technical standpoint and having the best car up front will definitely help. But the drivers also need to make a difference. The drivers need to get used to new systems, active aerodynamics, hybrid management, many new things that need to be learned in a short time and then applied on the track better than the others. So we will see who will be able to make a difference. Leclerc is ready to do it. He has had a more instinctive attitude. At first driving the car like a go-kart, but then he started to get accustomed to the new dynamics of 2026, which are crucial this year, and therefore understanding active aerodynamics better. The management of the hybrid, which are two fundamental elements. Hamilton, on the other hand, talked not only about the car, but also about the method. He recalled how the KERS since 2009 has been an extra boost that they used in Formula 1, but which is different from this new boost mode. This boost mode gives a lot of extra energy in a lap, much more than KERS, and it needs to be managed better than KERS. It is used at the most important points of the lap to try to make the most of this energy to gain an advantage in terms of tenths of a second per lap. That will be crucial. Additionally, he also talked about adapting to driving. The driving style will need to change. From the ground effect era, with the Venturi channels, which developed most of the aerodynamic load of the cars, well, that will change. We have already seen many cars with the rake effect, many cars with bargeboards, very elaborate. We have also seen a lot of space in the rear, which is very tapered to try to have more load at the back. So we will return to a driving style more akin to the pre-ground effect era with cars that have more load at the front. But we will see there will also be an effort to balance with the rear. So the driving style will also change. And Hamilton says he is ready to get used to this new style. Whoever can adapt first will have a great advantage. The setup we saw at Fiorano was very cautious with little rake effect, but it is clear that Ferrari is leaving room for more extreme configurations to explore in testing. There is also the issue of the dimensions on the Ferrari, which tells a lot about the work done on the power unit. In fact, the new power unit is still largely hidden, and it is the central theme. Where all the cars of the new era are developed around the engine, the organization of spaces is clear in Ferrari. The triangular air scope is small, a sign that Ferrari continues to prioritize the positioning of the radiators in the side pods, lowering the center of gravity, a philosophy carried forward for years. We remember the Ferrari F175, which set the standard for this type of radiators and power unit, despite the fact that today the hybrid requires significantly more cooling than in the past, and this leads to voluminous side pods with wide side openings and a management of hot air that mainly passes through the rear area. It is not a random compromise, it is a precise choice that favors low flows towards the gearbox and diffuser, even at the cost of giving up extreme side pods. Seen on other projects, the same can be seen on the hood with the so-called bazookas, volumes that accompany the flows towards the rear wing and help extract hot air. In the part of the Coca-Cola zone, which is much bulkier compared to other teams, above the serrated fin is not aesthetic, but serves to generate vortices to energize the flow in a key area of the car. From a purely aerodynamic point of view, this is not yet the definitive Ferrari. The front wing is just the first stage of development. The center of the car with bargeboards and Venetian is an area destined to change a lot, and even the diffuser shows different choices compared to Mercedes, a sign that aerodynamic compromises have been approached differently. All of this brings us to the words of Loïc Serra, who is the true responsible for this Ferrari SF26 and who gives us the most important key to understanding the entire project. Serra speaks of flexibility, of an architecture designed not to be perfect right away, but to be able to grow in a new regulation. Every day spent in the wind tunnel counts more than any preparation. And any performance. For this reason, the SF26 seen at Fiorano is only a version A. Efficiency, says Serra, is the true goal. Aerodynamic efficiency, integration of active aerodynamics, energy management are key elements that must work together, not as separate compartments. And here the concept of a collective project returns. The Ferrari SF26 is not the car of one department, but the result of cross-functional work between the chassis, aerodynamics, and power unit. The message in the end is clear. Ferrari does not yet know if this car will win, but it knows that to compete in this new era of Formula 1, it could not afford to be cautious. The SF26 is not a promise of success. It is a statement of intent. In fact, the most important phrase of the presentation is that the Ferrari SF26 is a car born to control movement. In fact, every flow on the SF26 is designed to be directed to a precise part of the single-seater. But then we need to see if they will achieve these results on the track. In testing, however, it is clear that especially in the front part, near the vergeboard area where the front suspension is located, we see that there are many arms, many aerodynamic appendages that serve to direct the flows in the best part of the car. And this is because every aerodynamic study has been done in detail, and we are only at an initial version. We will see how Ferrari progresses in its development. And we also see some concepts that have taken a back seat during the presentation and in the shakedown. In fact, we need to make a first comparison between the Ferrari SF26 and the Mercedes SV17, which highlights a clear fact. The two teams have interpreted the 2026 regulations following different philosophies, especially in the rear key of the floor, the front wing, flow management, and the diffuser. In fact, Ferrari has adopted a very obvious solution in the filling area of the diffuser, with a wide and vertical structure, a true barn door, designed to aggressively manage the flows exiting from the floor. Mercedes also uses a similar solution, which is this perforation, let's say, near the diffuser, which serves to extract the flows better, but the dimensions are slightly more generous on Mercedes compared to Ferrari, a sign of a greater emphasis on controlling the extractor. The interpretations of the area in front of the floor, however, diverge sharply. In fact, Ferrari chooses a much more extensive entrance that fully occupies the allowed regulatory volume, while Mercedes strongly pushes the concept of Venetian, maximizing the number and effectiveness of horizontal elements to condition the lateral flow and protect the floor from wheel turbulence. The nose also represents one of the areas of greatest divergence. Indeed, the Mercedes V17 features a higher and slimmer nose, while the Ferrari SF26 adopts a thicker transition towards the pylons supporting the front wing. According to some rumors from the aerodynamic department in the paddock, the interaction between the pylons and the nose would be one of the areas with the greatest performance potential in the new regulatory cycle. Finally, there are the rear vertical fins, which are also very different between the two cars, with solutions primarily designed for yaw stability, an increasingly critical aspect, with cars being less downforce dependent and more reliant on efficiency. Neither Ferrari nor Mercedes currently use dive planes on the front wing, which are more extreme aerodynamic solutions. The regulations do not mandate their use, allowing for modular components that could appear later, but the initial absence suggests a cautious development phase on the front end, awaiting more solid data. Particularly interesting about Ferrari, a solution never seen before in Maranello, are the two diagonal double fork struts, which help stabilize the bargeboards. Mercedes uses a single, more conventional horizontal element, if you will. Ferrari's choice appears unique in the current landscape and emphasizes a less conservative approach. A solution already observed on Haas is confirmed, namely the steering strut, which is positioned above the front arm of the lower suspension, with the rack moved back, and a configuration very similar to that seen on last year's McLaren MCL39. The lower arm itself seems to be broken down into a two-element structure, suggesting a more refined management of anti-dive and also anti-squat geometries. Ferrari and Mercedes converge instead on another detail, namely the front brake ducts, which are located behind the deflector, a solution that keeps the airflow clean, along the handplate and behind the tire, reducing aerodynamic interference. On the motor side, Enrico Gualtieri said it was a complex challenge. Maranello will choose to use 100% sustainable Shell biofuels, giving up the use of synthetic e-fuels, a choice that will obviously pay off in the long run and serves to optimize the thermal system's efficiency to better recharge the electric part of the engine. The SF26 project is completely developed under Oxar's direction. We mentioned the suspensions, the pusher configuration from the front and rear, the anti-dive angle of the upper front triangle is extremely aggressive because they wanted to take risks at Ferrari. We'll see if all these choices, very aggressive for the red car, some even unique, will then converge into greater performance. The comparison with Mercedes highlights two completely different approaches, but both aimed at maximizing efficiency and controlling flows, in a regulation that rewards the integration between mechanical dynamics and power unit. Obviously, we will only have the true judgment when the cars hit the track. Let me know your opinion on this new Ferrari, on the presentation, the shakedown, the words of Hamilton, Leclerc, Vasseur, Loïc Serra, and also the comparison with Mercedes. Do you think this Ferrari can be up front, fighting for victories? Can it fight for the title? What are your feelings? I am curious to read and respond to all your comments. As always, I remind you to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos related to Formula 1 and Ferrari. That's all for now. See you in the next video.